fairness to me is that, just making sure that everyone is given the right tools and the right opportunity to achieve what they would like to achieve.
My name is Katharina, and I'm the Community and Event Manager at eCulture, a company that is on a mission to shape the world of unbiased hiring. Welcome to the Oops, I'm Biased podcast. On today's episode of the Oops, I'm Biased podcast, I am speaking to the CEO of the Institute of Recruitment in the UK, Thorbjorn Bengtson. I had the pleasure of speaking to him a couple of weeks ago, where he reached out and said, funny that we haven't met yet. We're on the same mission in this world, creating equal opportunities for every candidate in the recruitment process. Today, we cover all things fairness in recruitment. This is a big topic. There's a lot to discuss. We didn't get to everything today. I'll make sure to link further resources in the show notes. But it was a wonderful conversation where he explains what fairness in recruitment actually means, why it is so important, what the main challenges are that he sees in companies with establishing fair processes in recruitment, how company culture also connects to that, and how awareness building and bias consciousness also connects to those criteria. And then he gives a lot of best practices and advice in the end. So please stay tuned, listen to the whole episode. There's so much that he shares with us. I learned a lot and I hope you will too. Without further ado, here's my conversation about fairness in recruitment with Thorbjorn. All right. Welcome everyone to the Oops, I'm Biased podcast. I am very happy to have a very special guest on the episode today. We've been in conversation for quite a few weeks. Super happy to be recording with you. It is Thorbjorn from the Institute of Recruitment. I won't give too much away on his introduction. I'll let him do that. He can do that much better than I. But we are talking about fairness in recruitment, which is a big topic. I have lots of questions prepared. Let's see how many we get through today. Welcome, Thorbjorn. It is so great to have you.
Oh, thank you, Katharina. It's great to be here today. I'm glad we finally managed to get some time together to discuss this important topic. So, as you said, I'm Thorbjorn. I'm the CEO of the Institute of Recruitment UK. I've been a business psychologist for probably around 10 years now. And I've always been working within the sort of fairness space, working with talent acquisition teams, recruitment teams, and really trying to make them as fair as possible. So when this opportunity came up with the Institute, I had to jump on board on that to really try and, make a lasting, much bigger difference to the way recruitment works in the UK.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about the Institute of Recruitment? What exactly do you do?
Yeah, so currently we're working with multiple companies, recruitment companies, as well as talent acquisition functions within tech, within finance. We've got a few VC companies we work with as well. And this is really to encourage fair recruitment processes. So we're very much looking at processes and a process-driven change. We work with companies to analyze their current processes to encourage development of fair recruitment processes within their companies, and then ready to help them build this from the ground up, within their companies. And we do this as well through auditing, through certifying their processes. So if you are a company that has great processes from the beginning, we're not going to come in and just change that. We're just there to give you the rubber stamp to say, you know what, you are doing things very well. Let's just showcase this to the world. So we can assist companies in that way as well.
Yeah, I can imagine there might be, more companies that have potentially recruitment processes in place that are maybe a bit shaky on the foundation. Sort of for one role we're doing this, for one role we're doing that. So I can imagine that your services are really helpful to those who, first of all, want to see sort of where do we lie in terms of our processes actually promoting equity, fairness, inclusion, but also what can we do after. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. Why don't you start us off with, when we talk about fairness in recruitment, what do we actually mean?
Okay, that's a good question because I think everyone has their own sort of understanding of what fairness in recruitment should look like. We've taken very much a scientific approach to this. So when we talk about fairness in recruitment, we're talking about every candidate getting an equal opportunity for their dream job. This means that companies are providing them with the right means for that is suitable to that candidate to showcase their skills, to showcase their expertise. But also it's about giving them an equal opportunity in interviews, in the actual recruitment process, within, the wordings, within job descriptions. It's all there to just make sure that every part of the recruitment process is giving everyone an equal opportunity to, succeed in that process. So fairness to me is that, just making sure that everyone is given the right tools and the right opportunity to achieve what they would like to achieve.
Yeah, I think that is also where we initially then connected, because you reached out to me saying, I have an inkling that eCulture is on a similar mission. Why don't we join forces in one way or another? Equal opportunities is obviously really near and dear to our heart at eCulture, trying to make sure that every candidate gets the chance they deserve and are being assessed fairly in that way. We talk a lot on this podcast about DE&I and recruitment and sort of why it is so important. But I don't think that we cover enough why fairness is so important. I think we talk a lot about why is inclusion important, why is diversity, sort of harnessing diversity and bringing in diversity into organizations important. But why do you think fairness in recruitment is such an important topic that we all talk about today?
I mean, that's a good question because I think fairness is important because it's a natural gateway to diversity. Diversity, obviously most people understand, now in 2024 that diversity is such a benefit to companies. The diversity of thinking, of creativity, the way that you can, reach out to a wider audience, in all aspects of business, it is such an important factor. But the fairness comes in because ultimately, I would argue there's a right way and a wrong way to create diversity in a company. A lot of companies, traditionally, when diversity became such a big thing to be looking out for, started employing very I would say harmful and dangerous methods to actually achieve diversity within their company. This is like, positive discrimination, affirmative action, that sort of thing, where they almost forcing people into these jobs that, probably shouldn't be in those jobs. They might lack the skills, they might, just not be a suitable fit to the company. But because they fit a certain criteria, these people are then hired in. And because of that, firstly, that's not a fair process. You're preferentially treating certain people to get into a job. But this is proven to be, terrible for all stakeholders. So mostly these people that get hired in, they might come into a company, feel a bit out of depth, feel like they can't perform. Their motivation drops because they feel like, I'm in this position now. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not performing. I'm not learning anything. They in that position. And then you look at all their colleagues, and now their colleagues are looking at these people saying, well, they shouldn't be here. They're only hired because of X, Y, and Z, So it means that the whole engagement of the company is dropping, from the person coming in to the people around them. And it also creates such a divide in the company. So fine, it might help diversity. It's not helping inclusion. It's not helping, the actual the longevity of the diversity within the company. So I think that's where the importance of fairness comes in, because as soon as you make it a fair process and as soon as you allow everyone to have an equal opportunity, you're allowing everyone, you're not relying on your bias anymore to make decisions. So you're naturally going to be improving the diversity of your company, but with the people that should be there, the people that have the skills, that have the ability to, excel in the position, as well as, being from, perhaps a less traditional um, position or less traditional people for your company, so it just allows all the benefits of diversity, and it reduces a lot of the negative impacts that, forced diversity can bring into a company.
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up. While you were talking, I was thinking about an article that Professor Brooke Gasta wrote for us on our blog. She was a professor at the University of Amsterdam. She did research into diversity quotas actually hurting companies' DE&I efforts. For exactly the reason that you just mentioned. If you hire people just for them being different, the people being hired are not going to perform well because they know they don't really belong, because belonging is such an important topic when we talk about DE&I. And then everyone else also develops that sort of skepticism and disengagement of saying, well, this is sort of the wrong reason for bringing in diversity of thought, because it's really just being forced onto it. So thank you for mentioning that. I might just link that article in the show notes, might share it with you as well afterwards.
Yes,
it's quite an interesting research that she did. Yeah. Now we're already talking a little bit about challenges that companies might be facing. Can you walk us through maybe two or three main challenges that you see with your clients around creating processes in recruitment that promote fairness?
Yes, of course. So I would say one of the main challenges I find is that it's actually getting people to understand that we all have biases, and that's fine. A lot of the time
Yeah.
I speak to people and hiring managers, and they say to me, well, I have biases and I can't be bias free, and they always think it's this sort of extreme where you either have no bias or you have bias, and that's not the case. Everyone in the world has bias. It's just how we want to cope with that, how we want to deal with that, and how we want to mitigate that in our processes. So I think that's the first challenge is just getting people to understand that it's not a you have bias or you don't have bias. It's more everyone has bias. So how are we going to limit the impact of this bias on this process? And I think that's when I see, a click in people when I'm discussing this with them, when they go from that fully skeptical sort of ideology about like fair recruitment processes to being a much more understanding that, there is ways to have a bias conscious process, or to be bias conscious in the way you work, without being without bias. And, I find that when people understand that, they're not looking to disengage as quickly as previously. Because when there's a goal that's unachievable, people aren't going to be trying to achieve that. So I think that is probably the most important thing that I discuss with people. And the biggest challenge is to really get them to understand that. Following that, I would say that probably the fact that there is no real widely adopted standard of recruitment. There's a lot of people have ideas of what is good recruitment, what is bad recruitment, but there is nothing that is, like a standard, like an actual standard of recruitment that people should try and strive towards. And yes, there are certain countries that are working towards legislation towards this sort of thing, and I think that's great. But I think before that is going to become the reason companies do it, there needs to be, I guess it's more of a social change of understanding what is the best practice in recruitment, how can we make it fair, and then for companies to want to actively work towards this. And I think the lack of that means that there's people that have no qualifications or no expertise within diversity, within fairness, anything like that, that are trying to make fair processes. There might be, managers of recruitment companies that are great recruiters, they might get great numbers all the time and be very good in the work they do. But then when they're looking at diversity, that's not their expertise, but they're still the ones trying to push that, or trying to make something work there because they know it's right to do it. But because there's nothing for them to actually, try and achieve, or something for them to work towards, it makes it very difficult for them to achieve anything, and this is the same for talent acquisition teams, because again, this isn't their expertise. I mean, you look at HR departments as well. A lot of the time, DEI falls under HR, and a lot of HR professionals don't have this understanding. So it's very much a situation where I think, it's a big challenge because there is no real direction for people to follow. And I mean, that was one of the main reasons I joined the Institute as well, because that's pretty much what we're trying to do, is have this standard that people can work towards, and I think there's a very big need for that globally for recruitment.
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up, because I talk a lot on this podcast with recruiters who then say, well, there's a lot of resources out there and they happily share them with each other, but there's just not that sort of quality check mark to them. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can make your process, say, more inclusive, or the way that you can source for diversity, but it's not really anything that sort of gives you that sort of, this is the standard that we're looking for, or this is sort of approved or certified by anything really at this point. I think there's just a lot out there, and I think we also contribute to that quite a lot, that we say we want to provide all of these resources for free for people who are interested and who want to improve their processes in recruitment. But again, we're just missing that little piece around, okay, so what's the gold standard for it then? Yeah.
No,
Indeed.
definitely.
Before we go into criteria, I do want to talk to you a little bit about process auditing. What aspects in recruitment should you, as a recruiter listening now, review internally, or have, say, someone like you come in and audit externally?
Okay. So I think for this, there are three main areas of your company you should be pretty much consistently reviewing. And that firstly is the competence of your people. So if you want to have, great processes, that's great. But, if you don't have the people that have the understanding of bias, have the understanding of bias conscious recruitment and of fairness, it makes it very difficult to actually, have people that actually work and support that ideology within their work. So firstly, it's the competence of your people, making sure they have the knowledge, the understanding, all of the great things that allow people to recruit fairly, and a big part of this as well is to have them to actually be able to understand their bias, and I think that's something that a lot of companies do very well, is actually, getting their people to do courses, to, getting some, I mean, there are some great DI consultants out there, getting them in to do some workshops with their teams. And I think this is a very important part. And thankfully, this is a part that I think a lot of companies actually do. So that's really good. But the next aspect I would say is processes. So having the right people in the place that have good understanding is great, but if you don't have the processes that back them up, that actually reduce the impact of bias within recruitment processes, it's like you've got half the job done, because those people are people. There's going to be times that they are fatigued and they're tired, that they having a bad day. And it's during these times that you need to have solid processes that can make sure that, even if this is happening, we have enough in place that it's still going to be a fair recruitment process. So I would say that's the second thing. So you've got the competencies of the people, the processes of your company. And then finally, I would say it's really creating a company culture, that that breeds this, that really supports fairness, that wants fairness to be apparent within the whole company. And this is really, I would say, this is the cement of the other two parts, that holds it all together. Because if you don't have that company culture, all of a sudden you'll have the people with the competencies, but they're not going to use them, because why would they? It's not ingrained into the company. You might have the processes, but who's going to follow the processes if, they don't, that's not something that they really care about. But by having that company culture, it really brings all of the aspects together to allow you to have, a truly, fair recruitment process. A lot of the time, I know you mentioned internally versus externally. A lot of the time, it's fine to do it internally, as long as you have those champions that can lead this. But the problem with that is, often, well, it's not a problem, but often getting someone externally in is a much more impactful way to make a change. And, as soon as your employees or your leaders know that someone's coming in to lead a workshop, they take it completely different than if, their line manager's leading a workshop. It gives it that level of expertise and seriousness to it that a lot of companies benefit from. So I think either way it's good, just make sure it's being done, but externally is always a better option.
Yeah, no, I fully agree what you just said. Also liked that you mentioned company culture, sort of the cement that binds it all together. I was gonna say the company culture is probably the hardest to get right or to shift the needle on. That's a conversation for another day. I think this is one that we could have at length. We could have a 2-hour podcast on that one. But yeah, I find it quite interesting that you mentioned those three as sort of one, the awareness building around bias consciousness. I think that's a wonderful term that you just gave me. I'm definitely going to use that in the future. Processes, and then also looking at sort of internal versus external. I think that was a great comment you made around that. So saying, yes, you can do it internally. Sometimes it is quite useful to bring in someone externally, because it's just, it's a different attitude brought in. It's also an outsider's perspective on what is happening. I think lots of times when we work on projects, initiatives, processes, we're so deep in it that we don't really see the wood for the trees. So we can't really assess if what we're doing is actually having an impact. What are, from your own perspective then, from the Institute of Recruitment, what are criteria that you find important to look at when auditing a company? From sort of, is it really looking at, company culture? Do you assess processes in a specific way? What criteria do you use?
Okay, so we look at a very holistic view of recruitment when we're discussing this. So we look at, the candidate experience and how the actual candidates are treated, how often they're spoken with, how, if they don't get the job, what's the process? If they do get invited for interview, what's the process? And really how the candidate experience is, because ultimately having a fair recruitment process isn't just about getting the people on board. It's about how you treat people throughout the whole process. So that's the first aspect is the candidates and how they are treated. We then look at actual interviews. Before interviews, let's talk about CVs, because CVs are obviously are proven to be some of the worst measures of a person. It doesn't really give you a whole lot of solid information, but what it does do is it gives you a brief understanding of whether you think someone can move over to the next stage. But within this, there are ways you can even make the CV reading more fair, by removing demographics, by removing names, universities they studied at, all the things that are irrelevant to the work post should not be considered within that sifting process. So it's about doing that, and obviously by rating CVs, like blindly rating them, you're removing biases such as gender bias, ageism, name bias, all of that sort of thing as well. And then if we move to the interview, a lot of the time, you can do simple things to make your interview process much more fair, such as using a structured interview, which means that everyone is, no matter who you're interviewing, they get the same questions, they're getting the same opportunity to answer those questions. So it removes, that sort of the bias of, let's give this person slightly easier questions because I like them. Let's talk to them in a way that is different to the rest of them so they can, converse better. So it's all about giving everyone a level playing field there to work with. And also within the interview process, something very simple that a lot of companies do now is using a panel interview, which is something quite, it's not rocket science to be implementing, but it's something that has such a big effect, where instead of having one person and their subjective opinion, you now have 5 people rating the same person, which now means, if you look at all of their the way they've all rated them independently, you can then see, okay, well, if only one person thought they were the worst candidate, but the rest thought, they're really good candidates, you probably think, well, there's probably some sort of bias being played here that meant that person didn't like the candidate. So it just allows you to really reduce that impact of bias. And then, comes to reference checking and things like that. There's the standard way of doing reference checking, but there are nowadays much more advanced ways to do reference checking that maybe take on a bit of a behavioral sort of aspect as well. Looking at different behaviors within their last companies that are associated with their work in the new one. So there are different ways to, mitigate bias within these processes. And I think for you to structure it very well, your company, you need to be thinking about recruitment in a holistic way. It's not one aspect of recruitment. It can't be, supported by 5 people that you've made champions of fairness in recruitment in your company. It needs to be a holistic approach that tackles each, area of this.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you mentioned candidate experience right off the bat. I think it's such an important topic. I think that recruiters and recruitment especially as a whole focuses a lot on how do we get candidate experience right, but there's not really any sort of tangible, what does that actually mean? How can we measure if candidate experience is going well? How can we make sure that it's fair for everyone? I think that's a wonderful one to mention right away, and then going into processes and sort of the standard tools for selection, whether that's a structured interview or an assessment that you're doing, or you also mentioned sort of ways to structure your interview also with diverse interview panels. I think those are great things to look out for. I think most of our listeners will know about these already, but it is probably more about taking a different lens to it, not just thinking about how can we implement these, but also how can we ensure on an ongoing basis that they're being stuck to. I think that's what you mentioned right up top as well, saying, your processes mean nothing if you can't have your people stick to them. I think that was a great comment from your side. And I think it might just be, that missing piece for many of us in that transition. Do you have any other advice for recruiters aiming to establish a fairer recruitment process that you think you could start tomorrow if someone's listening and really wants to get going?
Yes, I do actually. And because this is something that I've spoken to, a lot of people about recently. And there are a few key points that are easy to apply but make a big difference. Yeah, and the first one is really to embrace tech. A lot of people in recruitment are quite traditional in their way of working. And because of that, they are very anti-tech, or they don't want to be using tech in the process. But tech is such an easy way to implement, like such an easy thing to implement that makes a big difference. There are ATS systems that will blind CVs for you, that that just saves so much time. And straight away you've got no one looking at these names and that. So it means that you're in a position of working without bias right from the off, and the psychometrics that allow you to actually look at personality, looking at aptitude before you've even had any interaction with people, so you can see, okay, does this person have the potential to do the job before I've even spoken to them? So things like that are very easy to implement and have a big effect on fairness. I would say something that recruiters do well is training, but keep doing it. Keep training your people, equipping them with the knowledge of bias, bias consciousness, how to actually utilize this within the recruitment process, and work on your methodology. I've recently worked with a company that hasn't changed their actual way of recruiting for about 10 years. And a lot has changed in the last 10 years when it comes to tech and when it comes to, how you can firstly simplify your process, but also make it more effective. So, don't be afraid to innovate and, try out things, because there's so much out there that you can actually build upon. Again, I want to mention, building a strong company culture, because I think that is something that if you actually sit down with your people and you determine where you want to be and where you currently are in terms of your company culture, it doesn't take a lot. It's just a lot of little changes that can help you to achieve that, and get you from A to B. So I think by recognizing that your culture isn't what you want it to be, and you want to make a culture that is more supporting, that is more, unified, then by just addressing that and sitting down and having that conversation, it is a great start to actually making those changes. And again, there are a lot of consultants out there that can assist with this if you do need that extra bit of help. I think apart from that, I think the most important thing is just to not be afraid to ask for help. No one knows everything. It comes to a point where, everyone is going to need a helping hand to achieve what they want to achieve. And there are some great consultants out there. There's some great companies that support, specifically recruitment companies and talent acquisition companies to achieve a much more fair process. So use them. They are experts. They do know what they're talking about, and it can really help it to be a much more seamless transition from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those pieces of advice. If I can summarize them really quickly and you tell me if I missed something, train your people and keep training them. One really important one, embrace innovation and tech. There's so much that keeps changing that can help you, especially on the candidate experience side, but also on the fairness side, sort of bringing those two together. Focus on your processes. I think that's sort of the name of our whole conversation. Really looking at that. Look at your company culture, because again, there's nothing a process can fix if the people don't stick to it. And don't be afraid to ask for help. And with that, I will add all of your links to the Institute of Recruitment, but also your LinkedIn in the show notes, so people can reach out and know where to find you. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you, and I think you'll be happy to hear from them as well if they have any further questions, because we couldn't cover everything. We rarely can on this podcast. Did we cover everything that you wanted to discuss with me today?
Yes, I think we did. Thank you for that. And, really great to be here, to be included in this podcast, and, to meet you, Katharina has been lovely as well. I was so surprised that we hadn't met, after us being in business for like a year of business or so, and we hadn't come across each other. So I'm very glad that and grateful that we had this chance.
Yeah, me too. It's we're making up for lost time right now, which I'm very happy about. For everyone who listened today, do let us know what you thought of this episode. And if there is any topics that came up for you while listening, do write into our podcast to let us know what topics we should cover next. Maybe we can have Thorbjorn come on again to discuss a related one. I know there's a few offshoots that we could have taken today. Please be sure to come back in 2 weeks' time. We are running a parallel series on this podcast where we do deep dives into biases and how they impact recruitment. So do be sure to check those out too. And as I said, I'll include all of the links in the show notes. Please check them out. It's super valuable resources and connections that you can make here as well. And with that, I want to thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day and see you in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye.
Bye.